The job posting was mine, not similar to mine. Mine. Same systems, same reporting scope, the same 3 responsibilities I'd carried for 6 years, listed almost word for word. I only opened the internal careers page to send a link to a friend in another department. Then I scrolled down to the salary range. The floor of that range was higher than what I make right now. 2 weeks earlier, my manager had sat across from me, folded her hands, and told me there was no budget for my raise. Her hands were tied. Maybe next cycle. I believed her because I always believed her. That was the whole problem. I sat there with my own pay stub open in one tab and the posting open in the other, and I did the thing I do best. I checked the date on the requisition. That date is where this stops being about money. Let me back up, because if I start at the anger, none of it will make sense. And I want it to make sense the way it finally made sense to me, slowly, one document at a time. I run operations analytics for a mid-sized logistics company. 6 years in the same group. I built most of the reporting that the leadership team looks at every Monday. When a number is wrong, people call me before they call the system. That's not bragging. It's just the shape of the job. I was the person who knew where everything was buried, which is a useful person to have, and, it turns out, an inconvenient one to pay. My manager's name is Dana. I want to be fair to her, because for a long time I liked her, and because the easy version of this story is that she's a villain, and the easy version is wrong. Dana is warm. She remembers your kids' names. She says we a lot. When I turned down 2 outside offers in the last 3 years, real offers, both of them more money, she told me she'd fight for me, that people who stay get taken care of, that loyalty was the one thing you couldn't fake on a resume. I believe that too. There were signs, if I'm honest, that I chose not to read. Small ones. A new analyst named Kevin had joined the group 8 months earlier, brought in by Dana, and she spent an unusual amount of time with him, walking him through my reports, my reconciliations, the way I structured the executive suite. At the time I read it as her being a good manager, developing her people. I even helped. I sat with Kevin for hours, explaining how the cost center reconciliation worked, why certain numbers had to be pulled in a certain order where the data got messy. I was proud to be the person who knew. I taught him carefully. I taught him well. I'd think about those hours later. So when I finally asked for the raise this spring, I didn't think of it as a confrontation. I thought of it as a formality. I'd earned it. I had the receipts, the projects, the 2 straight quarters where my early warning on a carrier contract saved the company more than my salary, the 2 outside offers I'd walked away from. I put it in writing, calm, and professional, and I asked for a market adjustment. I even framed it the way you're supposed to. Not, I want more, but here is what the role is worth. And here is the evidence I've been doing it. Dana's first answer was kind and vague. Money was tight right now. The department was under pressure from above. She'd look into it. Her second answer, a week later, was the one that mattered. She closed her office door, which she never did, and she folded her hands on the desk, and she said there was simply no budget this cycle. Her hands were tied. She hated it. She gave me next cycle. I remember nodding. I remember saying I understood because I did understand. Every professional understands no budget. It's the most believable sentence in corporate life. It doesn't sound like a decision. It sounds like weather. On my way out, I heard 2 of the directors talking about hiring for the team. I let it go. Of course they were hiring. Companies hire. It didn't connect to me because nothing had taught me yet to connect things. I did one small thing that week that I didn't think of as important. I asked Dana, lightly, whether the freeze was department-wide, because a couple of people had mentioned raises going through elsewhere. She said yes, the whole department, top to bottom. Everyone was holding. She said it without hesitation, the way you say something true. I filed it away as reassurance. It wasn't. It was the first statement of hers I'd eventually be able to check against the document, and it was the first one that would turn out to be false. I just didn't have the document yet. For a few weeks, nothing happened. I did my job. I ran the Monday reports. I trained Kevin a little more. Life at work has a way of closing over a disappointment. You tell yourself next cycle, you get busy, the sting fades into routine. If the posting hadn't appeared, I think I would have waited a full year, quietly, exactly the way I was supposed to. The posting connected things. It was a Thursday, unremarkable, and I opened the internal careers page only because a friend in procurement wanted to see if a role had gone live. I typed in the wrong filter, got my own department, and there it was. Senior Operations Analytics Lead. I read the responsibilities twice. Owns the executive reporting suite. Serves as escalation point for data integrity issues. Partners with finance on cost center reconciliation. That last one made me stop because I wrote that sentence 2 years ago from my own goals document. Someone had copied it into a job posting. And then the salary band. A range, the way postings always show a range. The floor of that range was above my current salary. The top of it was well above. The kind of number I've been told, gently folded hands, was not available in this budget, this cycle, this reality. I didn't feel angry first. I felt confused. The specific confusion of a person whose facts have stopped agreeing with each other. There was no budget for my raise. There was a budget for my replacement, and it was bigger. Both things cannot be true. So I did what I do. I stopped feeling and started checking. The first thing I checked was whether the posting was even real or some stale template HR forgot to pull down. It was real. It was active. It had an application count. People were already applying for my job while I sat in it. The second thing I checked was the requisition date. Every internal posting carries a requisition, the approved, funded request to hire, with a creation date and an approval chain. I had reporting access to a lot of that data because reconciling headcount against budget was literally part of my role. It wasn't snooping, it was Tuesday. I pulled the REQ behind the posting the same way I'd pull any headcount line for the monthly close. It had been created and approved 3 weeks before Dana closed her door and told me her hands were tied. I want to be precise about that because precision is the only thing that kept me sane through this. The requisition wasn't drafted 3 weeks earlier. It was created, routed, approved, and funded 3 weeks earlier. In our system, those are separate stamps, each with its own timestamp and its own name attached. A draft is a thought. An approved, funded REQ is a decision with money behind it. What I was looking at was a decision with money behind it, dated before the conversation where I was told there was no money. I read the date 4 times. I checked it against my own calendar. The no budget, maybe next cycle meeting was right there, time-stamped. 3 weeks after the requisition to replace me had already been approved and funded. That's the moment the floor moved. Because a delayed raise is a budget problem. You can be annoyed at a budget problem, but you can't be betrayed by one. What I was looking at was not a delay. When Dana folded her hands and told me the money wasn't there, the decision to spend more money on someone else in my chair had already been signed. The meeting wasn't a no. It was a performance. It was something you do to keep a person calm and productive while the paperwork moves behind them. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I'm not proud of the version of me that wanted to walk straight into her office. I sat with it for 2 days instead. I told myself I might be wrong. I built a private timeline, just dates in a document only I could see. REQ approved. Meeting held. Posting live. I lined them up and looked at them, because I've spent my whole career learning that 1 document is a feeling and 3 documents are a fact, and I did not want to burn 6 years on a feeling. Those 2 days were the hardest part, harder than the meeting that came later, because I kept looking for the innocent explanation, and I wanted to find it. Maybe the REQ was a placeholder. Maybe someone in HR created it speculatively, and it didn't mean anything. Maybe the band was a standard template number and nobody intended to honor. I chased each of those down, one by one, The way I'd chase down a variance in a report, and each one closed. Placeholder recs don't get funded from a live cost center. Speculative postings don't get approval chains with a manager's name on them. Template bans don't sit above the salary of the person currently doing the job. Every innocent explanation I reached for dissolved when I put a document next to it. That's when the anger changed shape. It stopped being hot and became something colder and more useful. I wasn't wounded anymore. I was building a case, and building a case is a thing I know how to do. While I was lining up dates, something surfaced from the back of my memory. A name. Marcus. Marcus had my kind of job, one level over in the same group. He left about a year ago. Good analyst, quiet, the sort of person who never made noise. When he left, the story was that he'd wanted a change of pace. I remembered something else, though, something I hadn't thought about since. A hallway conversation, near the end, where he'd said, half laughing, that he'd been waiting on a comp adjustment that kept getting pushed to next cycle. Next cycle. The exact words. I found Marcus's number and asked if he'd get coffee. He was cautious on the phone, the way people are when you reopen a door they've worked hard to close. But he came. I didn't lead him. I just told him what I'd found, the posting, the band, the date. He got very still. Then he asked me to describe the meeting where Dana told me there was no budget. The closed door. The folded hands. The my hands are tied. He'd had the same meeting. Same phrases. Different spring. Marcus told me he'd asked for an adjustment for almost a year. Every time, the answer was the department was constrained, comp was frozen, he'd be first in line next cycle. He got tired of waiting and took another job. And here's the part that made me put my coffee down. A few weeks after he gave notice, his role was reposted. He'd never checked the band. He'd been too done to look. We looked together from my laptop, right there. His old requisition was still in the system, archived. The band that had been posted was above what he'd been making when he left. Two of us now. Same manager, same script, same frozen comp, same higher band repost the moment we became expensive to keep honest with. I sat there, and I finally let myself say the sentence I'd been avoiding, quietly, so I wouldn't sound dramatic even to myself. This was never about budget. No budget was a tool. It was how you kept a loyal, productive person cheap for as long as they'd tolerate it, and how you replaced them, for more, the moment holding them still got harder than letting them go. Once you can name a pattern, you start seeing where its edges are. I went back into the cost center data, the same reconciliation I did every month, nothing I wasn't authorized to see. I traced which budget funded my replacements requisition. It came out of the same cost center that, according to Dana, had no room for my raise. Not a different pool. Not some special executive hiring fund. The exact line I reconciled every month, the one I'd been told was tapped out. There was room. There had always been room. There just wasn't room for me specifically at a number that would have reset my band and admitted in writing what I was worth. And the approval chain on that requisition had Dana's name on it. Her sign-off. 3 weeks before the folded hands. There was one more line in that data that I sat with for a while. The requisition wasn't for a vague future hire. It referenced a transition plan, a note about knowledge transfer and onboarding support already underway. Onboarding support already underway. I thought about the hours I'd spent with Kevin, walking him through my reconciliations, and I understood that I had been the knowledge transfer. I had trained the transition into my own replacement cheerfully months before I ever asked for the raise that would be refused. That one I couldn't reduce to a date. That one just sat in my chest. I'd like to tell you I felt vindicated. Mostly I felt tired and a little sick, the way you feel when a story you told yourself for years turns out to have been written by someone else. Because the thing I've been proudest of, that I stayed, that I was loyal, that I turned down offers, hadn't been read as loyalty. It had been read as leverage. I found the last piece almost by accident, and I wish I hadn't because it's the one I still think about. Comp planning generates working notes, spreadsheets where managers tag their people ahead of the cycle. Retention risk, flight risk, priority for adjustment. I'd seen the template before. I'd just never seen my own row. In a shared planning file that hadn't been locked down properly, I found it. Against my name, in the flight risk column, someone had entered low, safe to hold. Safe to hold. I read that and understood the whole architecture of it. I wasn't underpaid despite my loyalty. I was underpaid because of it. The very thing that made me stay is what marked me as someone who could be made to wait. The offers I turned down, the "we take care of people who stay," I'd handed them the proof that I wouldn't leave, and they'd priced me accordingly. That was the day I stopped being angry at Dana specifically and started being angry at how ordinary the whole thing was. There was no villain twirling a mustache. There was a manager under budget pressure, an incentive to keep good people cheap, and a phrase, "no budget," that made a choice sound like constraint. That's worse than a villain, honestly. A villain you can remove. This was just how the machine ran when no one was checking the dates. I thought about leaving quietly, the way Marcus did. I had the timeline, the band, the REQ dates, the funding source, the approval chain, and now the note. I could have printed all of it, walked out, and let them discover the hole where I used to be. I didn't, because leaving quietly is exactly what the system was built to make me do. Quiet exits are how the pattern survives. So I chose the slower thing. I asked for a meeting with Priya, the director 2 levels up from me, and I asked HR's compensation partner to be in the room. I didn't send an angry email. I sent a calm one, saying I'd found a discrepancy in headcount and compensation planning that I thought leadership should see, and that I'd prefer to walk them through it in person. Then I built the packet, not a rant, a 1-page timeline and the documents behind it. The posting, the band next to my salary, the requisition date next to the meeting date, the cost center funding, the approval chain, Marcus as parallel, dates aligned, and last, the planning note. The meeting was quiet in a way I'll remember. Dana was there. When I laid out the timeline, she started with the phrases, "That's just how planning works, requisitions and comp move on different tracks, nothing unusual." And for the first 2 documents, that even sounded plausible. Then Priya looked at the requisition date, and then at the meeting date, and then at me, and asked Dana a simple question. "The REQ was approved before you told him there was no budget for his raise?" Dana said planning is complicated. Priya said the dates weren't. I watched Dana try 3 different versions of the same defense in the space of a minute, and I recognized all of them because they were the same shapes I tried on myself during those 2 days. The placeholder, the different tracks, the everybody holds. She said the requisition was contingency planning. Priya asked what it was contingent on, and there wasn't an answer that didn't end with me. She said comp and hiring live in different systems. Priya pointed out they were funded from the same cost center, which was on the page in front of her in my own careful 1-page timeline. She said she told me the freeze was department-wide because that was her understanding at the time. That was the one that landed wrong in the room, because the requisition she'd personally approved was the exception to a freeze she'd sworn was total, and she'd approved it before she told me the freeze was total. I didn't enjoy watching it. I thought I would in the 2 days beforehand when I was still angry in the hot way. I didn't. Dana wasn't a monster across the table. She was a person who'd made a series of small, defensible-sounding choices that added up to something she now had to sit inside while 2 people read the timestamps. There's no triumph in that. There's just the quiet of a story finally being told straight. I didn't need to raise my voice. That's the thing about evidence. Once it's on the table, you can stop performing certainty because the documents are certain for you. I said I wasn't there to accuse anyone of a crime. I said I was there because there's no budget had been used as an answer to me and to Marcus while the same budget funded higher paid versions of our own jobs. And that if that was policy, I wanted to know, and if it wasn't, someone should. Priya said the words that changed it. "This needs review." And she meant it. What happened after isn't a movie. It's better than a movie because it's real, and real is what I trust now. The compensation partner opened a review of the cost center and the planning notes. The safe to hold tag became a problem for the people who'd written it, not for me. You don't want that phrase in a file when someone upstairs is finally reading files. My band was corrected, backdated a partial amount, with an adjustment that put me above the floor I'd found on that posting. Dana kept her job. I didn't need her not to, but her comp planning stopped being something she did alone in an unlocked spreadsheet, and that mattered more to the next person than any apology would have. The posting for my replacement came down. I never learned whether that was mercy or optics. I stopped needing to know. Kevin, the analyst I trained, turned out to be the least guilty person in the whole thing. He hadn't been recruited to replace me. He'd been hired, told he was being developed, and pointed at my work the same way I'd been pointed at everyone else's when I started. He was a tool someone else was using, not a conspirator. When some of this surfaced, he came to my desk, uncomfortable, and said he hadn't known what the training was for. I believed him. I'd have felt the same at his age. I told him the reconciliation was worth learning regardless of why they taught it to him, which was true, and which was also the closest I could get to forgiving a situation that wasn't really his fault. The review took a few weeks, not a few days. Nobody was marched out. That's not how it works in a real company, and I'd stopped expecting the movie version. What changed was quieter and, I think, more durable. Marcus and I still talk. He didn't get anything back. He was gone, and the past doesn't reopen that cleanly. But he told me that seeing it named, seeing someone put the dates in a row and refuse to leave quietly, closed something for him. I think about that more than the raise. Here's what I actually kept in the end. Not the money, though the money was real. What I kept was the difference between two things I used to think were the same: being needed and being valued. I had spent 6 years proud of being needed, the person you call when the number's wrong, and I'd let that feeling stand in for value. They are not the same. Being needed is what makes you safe to hold. Being valued is what shows up in the band. I still have the posting saved, the one with my job and someone else's salary. I keep it not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of the day the meetings stopped being the truth and a document told it instead. The dates don't fold their hands. The dates don't remember your kids' names. The dates just sit there in order, telling you what was decided and when. I check them now, early and often, and before I believe the weather. If your loyalty has ever been treated as a discount, you already understand this story better than any spreadsheet could explain it. When you finally saw the number that didn't match what you'd been told, would you have confronted it that day, or done what I did and quietly gather the dates first? Tell me in the comments. I read them. And if stories like this sound like something you've lived, you're welcome here at Copper Note.